The fluorescent lights of the Greenleaf Market hummed a flat, indifferent tune, a sound so familiar it was usually just background noise. But that Tuesday, it felt like a drill boring into my skull. Every sound was magnified, every color too bright. The cart's wobbly wheel grated on the linoleum, a rhythmic scrape that matched the frantic beat of my own heart. I was just grabbing a few things: milk, bread, the chamomile tea. My husband, David, insisted I drink every night. He said it helped with the fatigue, the constant clinging exhaustion that had become my life's new companion for the past 6 months. The doctors were stumped. Probably just stress, one had said, patting my hand with dismissive sympathy. But this felt different. It was a deep, cellular weariness, a fog that settled behind my eyes and never truly lifted. I placed the box of tea in my cart next to a bag of lemons, their cheerful yellow a stark contrast to the gray palette of my mood. That's when it happened. I was at the checkout, placing my items on the black conveyor belt. The cashier was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with dark, worried eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. She'd checked me out before, always quiet, always efficient. Today, she seemed agitated, her fingers fumbling with the scanner. She scanned the milk, the bread, and then her hand paused over the box of chamomile tea. Her eyes darted up, meeting mine for a fraction of a second before looking away, towards the security guard near the door. She leaned forward, her voice a barely audible whisper that was swallowed by the beep of the scanner. "I know your secret." The words were so soft, I thought I'd imagined them, but the look in her eyes, a terrifying mixture of pity and fear, told me I hadn't. My blood went cold. My secret? What secret? My mind raced, flipping through a Rolodex of petty, private shames. Was it the second mortgage I'd taken out on the house? Without telling David, a desperate attempt to keep his struggling architecture firm afloat while pretending we were fine? Was it the way I sometimes drove past the little blue house where I grew up, just to feel a flicker of the girl I used to be before my life became this performance of placid domesticity? My cheeks burned. I fumbled for my wallet, my hands shaking. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice thin and reedy. Sarah didn't look at me again. She pushed the tea into the bag, her movements jerky. "That will be $22.53, she said, her voice returning to its normal flat tone. But the air between us was thick with unspoken things. I paid, grabbed my bags, and practically fled the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a sigh of finality. The drive home was a blur. Her words echoed in my head, looping over and over. "I know your secret." How could she know about the mortgage? It was impossible. We'd used an online broker. All the paperwork was digital, locked behind passwords on my laptop. It made no sense, unless the secret she was talking about wasn't mine at all. I pulled into the driveway of our perfect suburban home, the one with the manicured lawn and the welcoming porch swing David had built for me on our 5th anniversary. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, like I was looking at a set piece in a play. And I'd just forgotten my lines. David was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming along to some indie rock station on the radio. He turned, his face breaking into that familiar, handsome smile that had once made my knees weak. Now it just made my stomach clench. "Hey, honey, you got it?" he asked, gesturing towards the grocery bag. His eyes landed on the box of the tea, and his smile widened. Perfect. I'll put the kettle on. You look tired. He came over and kissed my forehead, his hand cool against my skin. You feel a little warm. Go lie down. I'll bring it up to you. His concern was a thick, cloying blanket. For years, it had been my comfort, my safe place. Now it felt like a cage. I went upstairs, my legs feeling like lead. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed where we had built a life, and stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me was pale, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Her hair was thinning, and there was a tremor in her hands she couldn't seem to stop. This wasn't just stress, this was something else, something sinister. David came in a few minutes later, carrying a steaming mug on a small tray, the fragrant steam of chamomile and something else, something vaguely sweet and earthy that was part of his special blend, filled the room. Here you go, my love, he said, his voice a gentle murmur. Drink this. It'll make you feel better. He set it on the bedside table and watched me, waiting. And for the first time, I didn't see a loving husband. I saw a man with a secret of his own, and the whisper from a grocery store clerk was the tiny, sharp key that had just unlocked a door in my mind, a door I was now terrified to open. The girl, Sarah, had looked at the tea. She had whispered her warning when her hand was over the tea. It wasn't my secret she knew. It was his. I didn't drink the tea. I waited until David went downstairs to get some work done, his footsteps receding down the hall, each one a soft thud of finality. I stared at the mug, the steam curling into the air like a ghostly question mark. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The thought was insane, monstrous. David loved me. He was my rock, my partner, the man who held me when I cried and celebrated every small victory as if it were his own. We had built a life from scratch, navigating the choppy waters of our 20s and 30s together, always a team. The idea that he would intentionally harm me was so profoundly wrong. It felt like a violation of the laws of nature. And yet, the girl's whisper, the way my body was failing me, a slow, inexplicable decline that defied all medical logic, the way David was always there with his special tea, his brow furrowed with a perfect performance of concern. I picked up the mug. The ceramic was warm, comforting. I brought it to my nose. Chamomile, yes, but underneath it, that other scent. He'd told me it was a mix of valerian root and lavender he'd ordered from a specialty herb shop, a blend to promote deep sleep. I had never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted him more than I trusted myself. Now that trust felt like the most dangerous kind of foolishness. I walked into our ensuite bathroom, the cold tile a shock against my bare feet. With trembling hands, I poured the contents of the mug down the sink. The pale golden liquid swirled and vanished, taking with it the warmth and the cloying scent. I rinsed the mug thoroughly, then filled it with hot water from the tap, letting it run until the ceramic was hot again. I carried the mug of plain hot water back to the bedroom and set it on the nightstand, a prop in this sudden, terrifying new play I was starring in. I had to know. I couldn't live with this suspicion festering inside me. It was too corrosive. I had to go back to the grocery store. I had to talk to Sarah. But I couldn't be obvious about it. If David was doing what my darkest fears suggested, he was meticulous. He would notice if I broke my routine. The next day, I pretended to feel even worse. I stayed in bed, complaining of a headache and nausea, which wasn't entirely a lie. The stress of my new reality was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and churning in my stomach. David was the picture of devotion. He brought me toast I couldn't eat and stroked my hair, murmuring soothing words. And of course, he brought me the tea, 3 times that day. Each time I performed the same ritual. I'd thank him, wait for him to leave, and pour the poison down the drain, my hands shaking more violently with each trip to the bathroom. The deception was exhausting, a different kind of fatigue from the one that had plagued me for months. This was the fatigue of hypervigilance, of knowing that every word, every gesture was being scrutinized by the man who was supposed to protect me. That evening, I told him I was out of my prescription anti-nausea medication. "I feel so awful, honey," I said, letting my voice crack. "Could you possibly run to the pharmacy for me? I don't think I can drive." He looked at his watch. He had a deadline, a set of blueprints that were due, but he masked his annoyance with a sigh of martyrdom. "Of course, sweetheart, anything for you. I'll go right now." The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I was in motion. I threw on a coat over my pajamas, grabbed my keys, and drove to the Greenleaf Market. My mind was a whirlwind of what-ifs. What if she wasn't there? What if she refused to talk to me? What if I was completely, horribly wrong? And I was destroying my marriage over a paranoid delusion. The store was quieter than it had been the day before. I walked the aisles, my cart empty, my eyes scanning the checkout lanes. And then I saw her, Sarah. She was at register 4, ringing up an elderly couple. I got in her line, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. I placed a single unnecessary bottle of water on the conveyor belt. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, my mouth dry. Sarah's eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of recognition, of fear. She knew why I was there. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely working. "You have to tell me. What did you mean? What secret?" She glanced around nervously. The manager was walking down the main aisle, his tie askew. "I can't," she mouthed, shaking her head. "I'm sorry." "Please," I begged, desperation making me bold. I think my life might be in danger." The words hung in the air between us, stark and horrifying. Her resolve crumbled, her eyes, filled with a depth of sorrow that seemed too old for her young face, conveyed everything. She quickly scribbled something on the back of my receipt and pushed it into my hand along with my change. "Check the brand," she whispered, so low I could barely hear it. "He buys the chamomile here, but the other stuff, the special blend. He told me once he gets it from an online apothecary. Said it was better quality." She wouldn't look at me again. She turned to the next customer, her professional mask sliding back into place. I stumbled out of the store, the flimsy piece of paper clutched in my hand. In the cold, sterile light of my car's dome light, I unfolded it. It wasn't a note, it was just one word, scrawled in shaky blue ink. Aconite. I didn't know what it meant. I drove home in a daze, my mind refusing to process the implications. David's car was back in the driveway. I had to pretend everything was normal. I took the pills he'd picked up, thanked him profusely, and curled up in bed, feigning sleep. But sleep was an impossible luxury. I lay there, rigid, listening to the sound of his breathing beside me. A slow, steady rhythm that had once been a lullaby, and now sounded like a ticking clock. Once I was sure he was asleep, I slipped out of bed and crept downstairs to my office. I turned on my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my pale face. My fingers trembled as I typed the word from the receipt into the search bar. Aconite. The results loaded instantly, a cascade of clinical horror. Aconite, also known as wolfsbane, monkshood, a highly toxic plant. The articles detailed the symptoms of aconite poisoning: nausea, dizziness, numbness in the face and limbs, a burning sensation in the stomach, irregular heartbeat, respiratory paralysis. It was a checklist of my last 6 months. Every single symptom, every mysterious ailment that had left my doctors shrugging was listed there in cold, black and white text. The articles described it as a poison favored in history for its subtlety, its ability to mimic the symptoms of a sudden natural illness, like a heart attack or a severe gastrointestinal virus. It was a ghost, a killer that left few traces if the dose was administered carefully, slowly, over time. He wasn't just trying to make me sick, he was killing me. Slowly, methodically, right under our roof, with a warm mug of supposed comfort. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of my desk, a wave of real, undiluted nausea washing over me. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose child I had once dreamed of carrying, was my murderer. The secret Sarah knew wasn't about money. It was about my life, and the chamomile tea wasn't the cure. It was just the delivery system. The knowledge was a physical thing, a shard of ice lodged in my chest. It was one thing to suspect, to fear. It was another to see it spelled out on a screen. To have the instrument of your own slow-motion murder named and defined by strangers on the internet. Aconite, wolfsbane. The name itself was a fairy tale nightmare, something from a storybook about dark forests and hidden evils. But this wasn't a story, this was my life. My first instinct was to run, to pack a bag, get in the car, and drive until the sun came up in a place where David couldn't find me. But where would I go? And what would I say? My husband is poisoning me with a rare herb he buys online. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. I had no proof, just the word of a grocery clerk and a list of symptoms from a website. David was a respected architect, a charming, well-liked man in our community. I was the fragile, chronically ill wife. Who would they believe? He would twist it, of course. He would say I was unstable, paranoid, that my mysterious illness was affecting my mind. He would be so convincing, his eyes filled with that deep, believable sorrow. He would have me committed before I could even find a lawyer. No, running wasn't an option. Confronting him was even worse. If I showed my hand, if I let him know I knew, he wouldn't hesitate. The slow, careful process would be over. He would just finish the job, make it look like an accident or a sudden, tragic turn in my illness. A fall down the stairs. An overdose of the sleeping pills he so thoughtfully encouraged me to take. My only path forward was through the fire. I had to stay. I had to play the part of the sick, oblivious wife, and I had to gather evidence, cold, hard, undeniable proof that would stand up in a court of law and strip away his handsome, charming mask for the world to see. A new kind of energy surged through me, born not of health, but of pure, unadulterated rage. The fog of fatigue was burned away by the white-hot fire of a singular purpose, survival. The next morning I began. When he brought me the tea, I accepted it with a weak smile. "Thank you, honey. You take such good care of me." I held the mug in my trembling hands, my performance enhanced by genuine fear. As soon as he left the room, I went into action. I had a collection of small, empty, travel-sized cosmetic bottles I'd saved over the years. I poured a small amount of the tea into one of them, screwed the cap on tightly, and used a permanent marker to write the date and time on the side. I hid the tiny bottle in an old shoebox at the back of my closet, tucked away beneath a pile of winter sweaters. This would be my routine now, a secret daily collection of the poison he was feeding me. Next, I needed more than just samples. I needed to hear him, to catch him in a lie, to record the truth. I used my lunch break, a rare moment when David was at a site meeting, to drive to a strip mall on the other side of town. I found a small, seedy-looking electronics store that advertised spy equipment. I walked in, my heart pounding, feeling like a criminal. I bought a tiny digital voice recorder, no bigger than a tube of lipstick, and 2 small nanny cams disguised as a phone charger and a digital clock. The man behind the counter, a greasy man with a conspiratorial smirk, didn't even ask what I needed them for. He just took my cash and wished me luck. Getting them into the house was a new level of terror. I set up the clock camera in our bedroom, on the dresser, angled towards the bed. It was a perfect, innocuous hiding spot. The phone charger camera went into the kitchen outlet, the one near the counter where he prepared my tea every single night. The voice recorder was my constant companion, tucked into the pocket of my robe or my jeans, always on, always listening. The house transformed. It was no longer a home, it was a stage, a evidence collection unit. Every surface felt hostile, every corner a potential hiding place, for a truth I was both desperate and terrified to uncover. I became an actress of the highest caliber. I leaned on him more, played up my weakness, my dependence. I let him help me up the stairs, my hand resting on the arm of my would-be killer. I would look into his eyes, searching for a flicker of guilt, a crack in the facade, but there was nothing, only a placid, unnerving calm. His care was flawless, his patience infinite. He was the perfect husband, and that's what made it so monstrous. One evening, as I was recording, he sat on the edge of the bed while I sipped my tea, which was mostly just hot water by then, as I dumped the majority of the poisoned brew. He was talking about his work, the stress of a new project, the demanding clients. Then his tone shifted. "You know," he said, his voice soft and contemplative, "I was just updating our finances, just getting things in order. It's good to be prepared." I felt a chill snake down my spine. "Prepared for what?" I asked, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of fragility. He smiled, a sad, gentle smile. "For anything, honey. Life is unpredictable. I was just looking at your life insurance policy. It's a good one. I made sure of that. If anything ever happened to you, well, at least we'd be taken care of, financially." He said it so casually, as if discussing the weather. He was talking about my death as a financial transaction. The digital recorder in my pocket felt like a block of ice against my skin. I had him, the motive delivered with a tender, loving smile. The days bled into one another, a grueling marathon of deception. I collected my samples, charged my cameras, and downloaded the audio files each night while he slept, my movements silent and furtive in the darkness. I listened to the recordings, my stomach churning. I heard him on the phone with creditors, his voice tight with a stress he never showed me, promising payments he couldn't make. I heard him talking to his business partner, lying about the firm's profits, and I heard his conversations with me, his voice dripping with false sympathy, every "I love you" a venomous lie. The second mortgage I had taken out, the secret I thought the cashier knew, it hadn't been enough. It was just a drop in the ocean of his debt. I had been trying to save his dream while he was methodically dismantling my life. The proof was piling up, a toxic collection of vials and digital files, stored in a locked box under a loose floorboard in my office. I was building a case against my husband, and with every piece of evidence, I felt a little stronger and a little more terrified. He was going to kill me. The only question was whether I could expose him before he succeeded. The strain of my double life was beginning to wear me down in a way the poison never could. Sleep offered no respite. My dreams were a tangled mess of running through dark woods, of smiling faces that turned into monstrous masks. I lost weight. The tremor in my hands became more pronounced, a genuine symptom of my terror, which I passed off as a worsening of my mysterious illness. David, of course, noticed, but he interpreted my decline as a sign of his success. He was growing more confident, more brazen. The mask of the doting husband would slip for a moment here, a moment there, revealing the cold, impatient killer beneath. One afternoon, he came home early. I was in my office, transferring the day's camera footage to a hidden USB drive. I heard the garage door open and panic seized me. I shoved the drive into its hiding place under the floorboard just as his footsteps sounded on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, a strange, tight smile on his face. "Feeling well enough to be at the computer?" he asked, his voice light, but his eyes were hard, scanning the room. "Just paying a few bills," I lied, my heart thudding against my ribs. "It's good to feel useful for a minute." He walked over, his hand resting on the back of my chair. He leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. "Don't overdo it, sweetheart. We wouldn't want you to have a setback." His words were a threat wrapped in concern, a silken promise of violence. He was getting tired of waiting. My slow decline wasn't slow enough for his creditors. The pressure was mounting, and I was the obstacle. I knew I had to accelerate my plan. I couldn't keep this charade up for much longer. My nerves were frayed to the breaking point, and his patience was clearly wearing thin. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly what he was ordering, how much and how often. His computer was a fortress. After my initial discovery of the word aconite, he'd changed all his passwords. He was smart, careful, but I knew his weaknesses. He had an ego. He kept meticulous records of everything, a trait that made him a good architect and I hoped a careless criminal. He had a second laptop, one he used exclusively for his side projects, as he called them. He kept it locked in his study, a room that was off limits to me. He claimed it was to keep his blueprints and designs secure from competitors, a precaution that had always seemed overly dramatic. Now I knew it was where he kept his darkest secrets. I needed to get into that room. My opportunity came on a Friday night. He was going out for drinks with his business partner, Mark. It was a weekly ritual. He'd come home late, smelling of bourbon and false camaraderie. He kissed me goodbye, his lips cool against my cheek. "Don't wait up for me," he said. "Get your rest. I'll make you some tea when I get home." It was a promise and a threat. He was reminding me of my place, of my routine. The moment his car was gone, I sprang into action. His study door was locked, as expected. I'd watched him enough times to know he kept the spare key, in a small magnetic box on the upper ledge of the doorframe, a ridiculously cliched hiding spot that spoke to his arrogance. My fingers, shaking, found the cold metal box. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The room was dark and smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I didn't turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my phone, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. The laptop was on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried all the old passwords I knew. Our anniversary, his mother's birthday, the name of his childhood dog. Nothing worked. Desperation clawed at me. I had a limited window of time. I sat there, trying to think like him. What was most important to him? What was the center of his universe? It wasn't me. It was his ambition, his image. The name of his firm was Apex Designs. I typed it in. Apex Designs 2023. Access granted. My breath hitched. I felt a wave of triumphant disgust. Of course, his password was his own monument to himself. The desktop was clean, organized, but I wasn't looking for files. I was looking for his digital footprint. I opened his browser history, and there it was, a link to an online store called Sylvanus Botanicals. It looked innocuous enough, with pictures of serene forests and herbal remedies. But as I clicked through his order history, my blood ran cold. He had been making purchases every 2 weeks for the last 7 months. The product name was listed as Aconitum napellus, dried root powder. There were orders for half an ounce, then a full ounce. The most recent order, placed just 3 days ago, was for 2 ounces. He was doubling the dose. He was preparing for the final act. I took pictures of the screen with my phone, my hands trembling so hard the first few shots were blurry. The order history, the shipping address, his name on the account, it was all there. This was the nail in his coffin. This was the proof that would put him away forever. I logged out, closed the laptop, and wiped it down with the sleeve of my sweater, erasing any trace of my presence. I locked the door and replaced the key, my movements precise and mechanical. I was back in bed, feigning deep sleep, when he came home hours later. He moved around the room in the dark, his shadow a menacing shape against the wall. I felt the bed dip as he sat down beside me. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, a sour, unpleasant scent. He didn't make the tea. He just sat there, watching me in the darkness. I kept my breathing slow and even, a Herculean effort of will. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed and finally lay down, his back to me. He thought I was getting closer to the end. He thought he was winning. But he had no idea that I had just gathered the last piece of evidence I needed to burn his world to the ground. The game was about to change. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to make sure he paid for every sleepless night, every wave of nausea, every single poisoned drop of tea he had so lovingly served me. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I had everything I needed, the samples of tea, the audio recordings of his veiled threats and conversations with creditors, the photos of his online poison orders. The evidence was a heavy, tangible thing, a weight in the shoebox in my closet that was both my damnation and my salvation. Now came the most dangerous part, the execution. I couldn't just walk into a police station. I was still a sick woman, and David was a master manipulator. He could easily paint me as hysterical. I needed to control the narrative. I needed the final scene to play out on my terms, in a way that would leave no room for doubt. My plan was simple, and its simplicity terrified me. I had to orchestrate a confrontation, but one where I was in complete control. I had to get him to confess on tape in a moment where his mask was fully off. I decided that Sunday night would be the night. He was always more relaxed on Sundays, the stress of the week temporarily forgotten. He'd be more susceptible, I hoped. On Saturday, I made a crucial phone call. I used a prepaid burner phone I'd bought at the same time as the spy gear. I dialed the number for the Greenleaf Market, my voice disguised, and asked for Sarah. When she came on the line, I could hear the fear in her voice. "Hello? Sarah, it's me," I said quietly. "The woman from the other day. I need your help, but I can't say more over the phone. I need you to do something for me tomorrow night. It's important. It's a matter of life and death." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "What do you need?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. exactly, I need you to call 911, I said, my words coming out in a rush. "Tell them you believe a woman is being held against her will and is in immediate danger at 124 Willow Lane. That's my address. Tell them her husband has been poisoning her and you're afraid he's going to kill her tonight. Don't tell them your name if you don't want to. Just make the call. Can you do that for me?" Silence. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I thought she'd hung up. "Okay," she said, her voice small but firm. 9 p.m., I'll do it." "Thank you, Sarah," I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me. "You're saving my life." I hung up and broke the phone in half, tossing the pieces into a public trash can. The final piece was in place. My only ally, a virtual stranger, was my lifeline. The rest of Saturday and most of Sunday passed in a surreal haze. I was a ghost in my own home, moving through the rooms, performing the mundane rituals of a weekend. I ate, I slept, I watched television with David, his arm draped casually around my shoulders. His touch felt like a brand, a claim of ownership over a life he was actively trying to extinguish. The physical revulsion was so strong, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from flinching. He was in a good mood. A major contract he'd been chasing had finally come through, he told me. It was a lie, I knew. I'd heard his desperate phone calls. The only major windfall he was expecting was my life insurance payout. He was celebrating a victory that hadn't happened yet. That evening, he decided to cook. He made my favorite, pasta carbonara, and opened a bottle of expensive red wine. It was a celebration dinner, my celebration dinner. I could barely swallow the food, each bite tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, his head tilted. "Just tired," I said, offering a weak smile. "It's been a long week." "Well, I have just the thing for that," he said, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "I'll make us some tea, a special, extra soothing blend tonight. You deserve it." The moment I had been waiting for and dreading had arrived. I had the voice recorder in the pocket of my cardigan, the tiny red light blinking, confirming it was active. The camera in the kitchen was angled perfectly on the counter. I watched him as he moved with a familiar, practiced grace. He took out 2 mugs, not just one. He spooned the chamomile tea into both from the box I'd bought. Then he turned his back to me for a moment, pretending to reach for the honey. I saw his hand dip into his pocket and then quickly move over one of the mugs. It was a swift, subtle movement. Anyone else would have missed it. But I was watching with the hyper-focus of a cornered animal. He had the aconite on him, the 2-ounce packet he had just received. This was it, the final dose. He poured the hot water, the steam rising to obscure his face for a moment. When it cleared, he was smiling, that same loving smile. He brought the 2 mugs to the table and set one in front of me. "Here you go, my love," he said. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. It was 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes until Sarah's call. I had to keep him talking. I had to make him confess. I looked at the mug, then up at him, and I let the mask of the weak, trusting wife fall away for the first time in months. I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze steady and cold. "What's in it, David?" I asked, my voice devoid of the tremor he was used to. It was clear, strong, and accusatory. The change in me was so abrupt, it startled him. His smile faltered. "What are you talking about? It's your tea, chamomile, the usual." "No," I said, leaning forward. "Not the usual. You put something else in it tonight, just like you have every night for the last 7 months. I want you to tell me what it is." David's face went through a rapid series of transformations. First, confusion. It was expertly feigned, the furrowed brow and bewildered shake of the head. "Honey, you're not making any sense. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you're feverish." He reached a hand out to touch my forehead, the classic gesture of the concerned husband. I recoiled as if from a snake. "Don't touch me," I snapped, my voice sharp and loud in the quiet room. The second transformation was irritation. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the impatience beneath. "All right, that's enough. You're clearly overwrought. You need to calm down and drink your tea." He pushed the mug a little closer to me, his jaw tightening. This was the moment. I had to push him over the edge to force the monster out from behind the handsome facade. I took a deep breath. "It's called aconite, isn't it? Wolfsbane. That's what you ordered from Sylvanus Botanicals. First a ½ ounce, then an ounce. But that wasn't working fast enough for you, was it? So you ordered 2 ounces a few days ago. Was that for tonight, David? Was this supposed to be the final dose?" His face went completely white. Every trace of color drained away, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. The charm, the warmth, the love, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind something I had never seen before. Pure, reptilian coldness. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. "How?" he whispered, the word a ragged exhalation of disbelief. "How do you know that?" "You're not as smart as you think you are," I said, my voice steady despite the violent trembling that had started in my legs. The recorder in my pocket felt like a talisman, warding off evil. "You kept records, you got arrogant, you thought I was too weak, too sick, too stupid to ever figure it out." He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement. The shock was being replaced by something else, something far more dangerous. It was a cold, calculating fury. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. "The life insurance policy," I continued, pressing my advantage. "That's what this is about, isn't it? The firm isn't doing well. You're drowning in debt. My $2 million policy was your escape plan." He didn't deny it. He just watched me, his eyes dark and empty. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. It was a terrifying, humorless thing. "You are smarter than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice a low, menacing purr. "I should have just used a higher dose from the beginning. My mistake. I was trying to be too clever, to make it look natural." He had just confessed. The recorder in my pocket had captured every single word. A wave of triumphant relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "But it doesn't matter that you know," he said, walking slowly around the table towards me. "It doesn't change anything. You're not going to be telling anyone." My blood ran cold. The clock on the microwave read 8:56 p.m. 4 more minutes. It felt like a lifetime. I pushed my chair back, trying to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. He was stalking me now, his movements slow and predatory. "What are you going to do, David?" I challenged, my voice shaking. "Kill me right here? How will you explain that?" "The same way I was going to explain your eventual death," he said smoothly, his voice dangerously calm. "A tragic turn. Your weak heart finally gave out. You were so fragile. Everyone knew it. Everyone will be so sad. They'll bring me casseroles and tell me what a devoted husband I was." He was only a few feet away from me now. I could see the utter lack of humanity in his eyes. He was a hollow man, a shell filled with greed and resentment. He lunged. I screamed and scrambled backwards, my chair tipping over with a crash. I ran for the living room, for the front door, but he was faster. He grabbed me by the arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. He was so much stronger than I was. He dragged me back towards the kitchen. "You are going to drink that tea," he snarled, his face contorted with rage. "And then you're going to have a tragic accident. You'll fall and hit your head. It will be so believable." He was forcing me back into the chair, his hand clamped over, my mouth to stifle my screams. I fought back, kicking and scratching, but it was useless. He was a man possessed, his strength fueled by desperation. He picked up the poisoned mug from the table, his other hand twisting my head back, forcing my jaw open. The hot ceramic pressed against my lips. I could smell the bitter, almond-like scent of the aconite. This was it. My plan had failed. He was going to kill me right here, just minutes before help was scheduled to arrive. I closed my eyes, a silent prayer on my lips, and then, through the terror, I heard it. A sound from outside, a siren, faint at first, then growing rapidly louder. It was a beautiful, piercing wail, the most wonderful sound I had ever heard. David heard it too. He froze, the mug hovering inches from my mouth. His head whipped towards the front window, his eyes wide with disbelief and panic. The wailing grew louder, closer, resolving into the distinct sounds of multiple police cars pulling up right outside our house. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in frantic, strobing colors. Someone was pounding on the front door, a heavy, authoritative banging. "Police, open up!" a voice shouted. It was over. He had lost. His perfect plan had shattered into a million pieces. The look on David's face in that moment is seared into my memory forever. It was a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The predator, so confident just seconds before, was now the trapped animal. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The flashing lights bathed him in alternating waves of red and blue, a demonic strobe effect that highlighted the sweat beading on his forehead. He let go of me, his grip slackening as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. I scrambled away, gasping for breath, my throat raw. The pounding on the door grew more insistent, accompanied by the shout, "We have a report of a woman in distress. Open the door now, or we will force entry." David looked at me, then at the poisoned mug still in his hand, then back at me. For a fleeting second, I saw a wild idea flash in his eyes, to force it down my throat before they could get in, to finish the job. But it was too late. He knew it. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He placed the mug back on the table with a hand that was now trembling uncontrollably. The monster was gone, replaced by a pathetic, frightened man. He tried to compose himself, to pull the mask of the charming husband back over his face, but it was a shoddy, transparent effort. "Stay calm," he hissed at me. "Let me handle this. Say nothing." He walked to the front door, taking a deep, shaky breath before opening it. I remained by the kitchen table, my legs too weak to hold me. I could hear the entire exchange. 2 police officers stood on our porch, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. "Is everything all right here, sir?" one of them asked, his eyes looking past David into the house at me. "Everything's fine, officers," David said, his voice a strained imitation of his usual smooth tone. "My wife and I were just having a small disagreement. She's been unwell lately, a little emotional." He was already starting to spin his story, to paint me as the unstable one. But his story was no match for the scene behind him. They could see the overturned chair, my terrified face, the wild disarray of a struggle. I took out the digital recorder from my pocket and held it up. It was still recording. "He tried to kill me," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "He's been poisoning me for months. He just confessed. It's all on here." The officers' expressions hardened. They pushed past David, who offered no resistance, his body seeming to deflate. One officer came to my side while the other handcuffed my husband. "Sir, you're under arrest for suspicion of attempted murder." David didn't protest. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his head bowed, as the cold metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The sound was deafeningly final. It was the sound of my freedom. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, paramedics, and detectives. I was checked over, my bruises documented. I gave them my statement, my voice cracking with exhaustion and relief. I handed over the evidence box, the meticulously labeled vials of tea, the USB drive with the camera footage, the photos from his laptop, and the little recorder that held his chilling confession. They took the mug from the kitchen table, handling it with gloved hands, a crucial piece of evidence. They led David away. He looked at me one last time as they put him in the back of the squad car. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a cold, bottomless hatred. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was only sorry he got caught. After everyone had gone, the house was preternaturally quiet. The only evidence of the night's chaos was the overturned chair and the lingering scent of David's cologne. I walked through the rooms of the home we had shared, a home that had become my prison. It no longer felt like mine. It was tainted, every surface holding the memory of his betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch swing he had built, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the sun come up. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything was different. The birds still sang their morning chorus. The neighbor's sprinkler still turned on at exactly 6 a.m. But I was a different woman than I had been 24 hours earlier. I was no longer a victim waiting for death. I was a survivor. The next day, I met with the lead detective, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor named Detective Miller. She listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, from the first feelings of fatigue to the grocery clerk's whisper to the final, terrifying confrontation. She looked at the evidence I had collected, her expression growing, grimmer with each item. "You did an incredible thing," she said when I was finished. "You saved your own life. Most people in your situation, they don't make it out." She told me the lab had already confirmed the presence of a massive, lethal dose of aconitine in the mug from the kitchen. The samples I had collected over the weeks showed a slow, steady increase in the poison's concentration. The case against him was, in her words, a slam dunk. Sarah came to the station and gave her statement, her voice trembling but resolute. She told them how David had sometimes come through her checkout line to buy the chamomile tea, how he'd once bragged about the special, expensive herbs he ordered online for his sick wife. She said he had a strange, cold look in his eyes that had always unsettled her. She had seen my physical decline week after week and had finally put the pieces together. Her whisper had been a desperate, impulsive act of humanity, a shot in the dark that had hit its mark. She was the hero of my story, the stranger who had cared enough to take a risk. I owed her my life, a debt I could never truly repay. The legal process was slow and grueling, but with the mountain of evidence, the outcome was never in doubt. The audio recording of his confession was played in court, and a hush fell over the room as his calm, cruel words filled the air. His attempts to paint me as mentally unstable crumbled under the weight of the physical proof. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The day the verdict was read, I felt not joy, but a profound, quiet relief. It was the closing of a chapter, the final locking of a door I never wanted to open again. The aftermath of the trial was a strange, hollow period. The life I had known was gone, incinerated by David's betrayal. The house, our home, was sold, its contents divided and scattered. I couldn't bear to keep anything that reminded me of him, of the life that had been a lie. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment in a different town, a place with no memories, a blank slate on which to write a new story. For a long time, I was adrift. The hyper-vigilance that had kept me alive for months didn't just switch off. I jumped at sudden noises. I distrusted kindness, searching for the hidden motive behind every smile. The act of making a cup of tea could send me into a full-blown panic attack. The poison was gone, but its shadow lingered, a toxic residue in my mind. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, painful process of rebuilding my world from the ground up. I went to therapy, where I learned to untangle the complex knot of grief, rage, and fear that had taken root in my soul. I grieved for the man I thought I had married, the man who had never really existed. I raged at the man who had seen me not as a partner, but as a problem to be eliminated, an obstacle on his path to financial solvency. And I worked through the fear, the deep, primal fear that I could have trusted someone so completely and been so catastrophically wrong. Slowly, tentatively, I began to live again. I started with small things. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from during my illness. I took long walks in the park, feeling the sun on my face, marveling at the simple, beautiful fact of being alive. I started painting again, a passion I had given up years ago, finding solace in the bright, uncomplicated colors on the canvas. One of the first things I did after settling into my new life was find Sarah. I invited her out for coffee, and she accepted. We sat in a quiet cafe, the air filled with the comforting aroma of roasted beans. We were awkward at first, two strangers bound by a horrifying secret. We didn't talk about David or the trial. We didn't need to. Instead, she told me about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and I told her about my rediscovered love for painting. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave. You didn't have to get involved." She looked down at her cup, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I almost didn't," she admitted quietly. "I was terrified, but then I kept seeing you, getting paler and thinner each week. I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing, and then you stopped coming to the store." We looked at each other, and in that moment, there was a profound understanding between us. She was more than just a grocery clerk. She was a woman who had seen another woman in peril and chosen to act. Her quiet courage was a beacon in the darkest period of my life. We became friends, an unlikely bond forged in the crucible of my survival. Our friendship was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most important people in our lives are not the ones we expect. Sometimes they are the quiet observers, the ones who see the truth when everyone else is blind. Years have passed now. The sharp edges of the trauma have softened, though the scars remain. They are a part of my story, a reminder of my own resilience. I am no longer the pale, fragile woman who walked into the Greenleaf Market that fateful Tuesday. I am stronger, wiser, and more cautious, but I am not broken. I have learned to trust again, not with the blind faith of my past, but with a clear-eyed awareness of both the darkness and the light that people are capable of. My life is quiet now, and I cherish its simplicity. My apartment is filled with my paintings, vibrant canvases that are a testament to my return to the world of the living. I have a small garden on my balcony, and the simple act of nurturing something, of watching it grow, brings me a peace I never thought I would feel again. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I think of David. I don't feel hatred anymore. Just a vast, empty pity for a man so hollowed out by greed that he would try to extinguish a life to save his own vanity. He will spend the rest of his days in a concrete box, a prisoner of his own choices. I am free. The secret the grocery clerk whispered to me was never mine. It was his. It was a dark, ugly thing he had tried to bury inside me. But her words, that simple, terrifying phrase, became a lifeline. It was a spark in the darkness that gave me the strength to fight back, to uncover the truth, and to reclaim my own life from the hands of the man who was supposed to love me most. I survived, and in the end, that is the only secret that matters.